Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I'll be your moderator and technical support for this session. Just wanted to introduce myself briefly as well as with some housekeeping items. I wanted to let everyone know on the meeting that we have disabled your ability to unmute yourselves. So you will not have the ability to unmute yourself, but if you have questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to post those in the chat. And then if time allows, Chris will address those at the end of the session. And if not, he will address them via email. So we want to have a written documentation of all your questions so we can save the chat to make sure we get to those. And then this session is being recorded. And so we will send out the recording after the meeting. And then we also have enabled live transcript closed captioning. So if you need that for accessibility reasons, or if you would like to just follow along, you can turn that on down on your Zoom toolbar there. And if you have any other questions, I also wanted to mention, I apologize, Chris, that I will be putting the slide decks that Chris is going to be discussing today in the chat so you can download them as well. And with that, I will introduce and let Chris Tylen take it away.
All right. Thanks. I need to quickly email one particular person who I'm not seeing in here yet that I feel that it's very important that he be on this training. So just reminding him that
and while Chris is doing that, I am putting the slide deck in the chat here. So right now we're going to be doing user IDs first. So I just put that PDF in the chat so you can all download it and follow along.
Back to the resume share. Okay, can everybody see the LeadIn page here?
We sure can. It looks great.
Okay. All right, guys. For the most part, a lot of you have been IWDS Local System Administrators for a while, and this will be a lot of refresher information for you. I'm going to go fairly quickly, mainly because we're trying to cram what was 2 afternoon sessions into 1 2.5-hour session due to time constraints. We're going to cover the user IDs, editing IWDS screens, and then the entities and relationships. I don't deal with training programs or certified training programs. That's going to be something that if you guys have questions or things that you need on that, you'll contact the performance unit, either Mark Burgess or Paula Berry, and we'll discuss that when we get to that. I think that their contact information is listed in that slideshow. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start the user IDs. For those of you who are newer IWDS Local System Administrators, this is the we're going to cover just about everything except EBS, IEBS, which I'm your main contact on, but it's not in the PowerPoint because it's not directly related to IWDS. So here's just a brief list of some acronyms that we'll be using in this presentation. Most of you should be familiar with these by now. Probably the two newest ones that may catch you a little bit off guard are SDA, which is the Shared Data Agreement, and LSA, which is Local System Administrator. So, systems that we have for user access that we're going to cover today are IWDS, where you have your local LWIA IDs that are in there. We have the Ibiz system, which you access for unemployment data from IDES, and IES, which I believe gets you your SNAP and other related data from DHS. We also have, which I just realized isn't on here, in IWDS, you may have access sometimes to a statewide grant where you will have an LWIA 90 ID for either your staff or yourself. and those are handled by either Jim Potts or me. And as I said, IWDS is owned by DCEO, which is why I'm able to provide user assistance on it. Ibiz is owned by IDES, so all I do is act as a gatekeeper. I maintain IDs, do password resets, deactivate IDs, create new ones upon request, but it's not a system that DCEO owns, so I'm not able to provide any user assistance with it. Same with IES. It's a system that's jointly owned by Healthcare and Family Services and Department of Human Services. Janet Davis provides access to it, but DCEO is not allowed to give any kind of user assistance on the screens because it's not our property. The IDES data sharing agreement. In order to gain access to IWDS or IBIS, each user has to have a signed IDES data sharing agreement acknowledgement form, attachment D shared data agreement, on file with Office of Employment and Training. The form needs to be filed with the SDA liaison via email before any access rights are granted, either by the IWDS system administrators or by you, the local system administrators in the LWIA. So right now, Janet Davis is our SDA liaison. Before you create an IWDS ID for access, you have to have this data sharing agreement signed and filed with Janet, and then receive an email from Janet saying that you're good to go before you grant any user access to IWDS, because there is data in there from IDES that we share with them that comes across automatically in our system. So don't give anybody access until you've gotten the go-ahead from Janet. The data sharing agreement looks like this. And when you do the drop down, you're supposed to pick that the person is an employee of the LWIA, a Title I grant recipient. The only stuff that Office of Employment and Training deals with is when we're dealing with stuff related to WIOA or IWDS. So if somebody is trying to get access for a reason other than that, unless it's trade kind of falls in with WIOA for under most of our different categories, they won't be getting access through us. They'll have to get it from somewhere else. But what happens is you pick the employee of an LWIA, Title I grant recipient, you pick WIOA case manager, the person's name gets entered, signature from the individual, date it, send it into Janet. IWDS Local OEF. This is where you guys create the IDs for staff users and new local system administrators in your own LWIA. You grant or remove user roles. So you could create a person today, and then next week you need to give them more access to things in the IWDS system. You just keep adding them. Some LWIAs have multiple logins for their employees. I know that LWIA 20 likes to break it down by county. We have a couple other LWIAs that like to have a case manager or career planner role, and then they create a different role if the person becomes a supervisor, and then even a third different role for the person if they become a local system administrator. You don't have to do that. If that's something you want to do, you can. It's up to your local OEA, however you want to run it. If you want to break the duties down between what login they're in, that's fine. If you want to just leave one login and just keep adding and removing roles as needed, depending on what their job duties are, that's completely acceptable as well. The local system administrators also have the ability to re-enable any IWDS LWIA user that has been disabled. The IWDS system automatically disables any user that hasn't logged in within the last 35 days. And that happens overnight automatically. What would happen is that we'll cover this here shortly, but you go in, you re-enable the person, you save it, and then that person has basically until the end of the day to log in, or they're going to get locked out again. You're also able to reset the IWDS local LWIA user passwords, if the person has locked themselves out and they can't remember their ID or their password. And then when a person leaves your agency, you have to go in and disable the IWDS users that are no longer employed by your LWIA. So creating a new user, anything with a red star is going to be a required field, and that's consistent all the way through IWDS. So what will happen here is when you're adding a user, you obviously have to put in the first name, the last name, the phone number, the email address. Your LWIA will automatically populate for you based on what LWIA you're the local system administrator for. You have to pick your Illinois WorkNet Center, and then you have to pick your Illinois WorkNet Center partner. The Illinois WorkNet Center partner field is a drop-down with the following choices. You just pick the one that that fits with what's going on. The last choice populated will always be the one that's associated with your local LWIA. That's usually the one that you'll be selecting. And when the user is completed, this is what it should look like. So I did someone named sample user. The username is generated by IWDS based on the name that you entered. So now sample user comes up as S user. Now let's say there's already somebody in here who was simple user. Well, then that would mean the next person who comes in with a first name, first initial S, last name user, the system will add a number to the end and it will just keep incrementing. So it could be S user 1, S user 2, S user 3, etc. If you notice right here, the last login is 11-1900. That's because the person has never logged into the system because you're just now creating them. The next part of creating a user is these additional user roles that are at the bottom of the screen. You as the local system administrator can choose to grant or remove any of these roles by just simply using the checkbox. Each role allows a user to access different features in IWDS. There are some roles that are view only, some that are data entry, some that give access to run different reports. The supervisor role, career planner supervisor up here at the top, which grants some limited super user powers that are greater than a career planner, but not as great as a local system administrator. And there's the local system administrator role when you're creating another super user. I do have a PDF that I shared with Kirsten that should be available for download that gives a breakdown of what some of these roles provide. So when you go through and you're creating a person, you go ahead and you pick, this one's going to be someone who's got case management view only, their LWIA staff, participant period reports, or they can run participant reports, performance management reports, summary reports. They're a WIOA career planner, a trade career planner, and they have the ability to do WIOA youth, not 5% and 5%. So we basically created a generic career planner here. And once we're satisfied with the roles that we've selected, we click Save to continue. When you save the record, IWDS will generate a pop-up message at the top of the screen with the new IWDS username and their password. So this created S user. Here's their initial password for logging in. IWDS also links over with Illinois WorkNet and provides an email address for Illinois WorkNet and a password. I recommend that if this is going to be the ID of record for them, I would do a screenshot when you create your new user so that you have a record of the Illinois WorkNet email and the access, because this is something that you can't access again after you get past this point. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if there already was an S user, it would be S user 1, S user 2, etc. Now we're taking a look at IWDS User Management. So as a local system administrator, you have the ability to re-enable a disabled IWDS user and reset their passwords. As I said earlier, IWDS will automatically disable any user that hasn't logged into the system within the last 35 days. And if you look at the far right column, when you do a list IWDS users and you're doing a search, that far column here tells you whether they're enabled or not. An N means no, a Y means yes. So sample user is currently disabled. So you go into the record by clicking the view, and you change enabled from no to yes, and you have to change the disabled reason. Long-term inactivity is automatically put in there anytime the system disables someone. So you change it to back up to the blank, which is at the very top. And then at that point, you click save. If you are needing to re-enable the ID and reset the password, it has to be treated as two separate tasks. You cannot do both at the same time. So at this point, if you accidentally go up and hit reset password, when you go back to the main screen, they're going to be disabled with a reset password. You have to do it in two steps. I would do the re-enable first, then click save, and then go back in and do the password reset. The password reset is up at the top, reset password. You just click the button. It gives an informational message with the new user password, which is auto-generated. This temporary password is good until it's used. So once you've reset someone, until they try to use it, it's fine. It's not like this password is going to expire in 2, 3, 4, 5 days. It's good until they use it. And when they log in, they should be forced by the IWDS system to actually change the password to their own new choice of passwords. And as I said earlier, up at the top, you're able to look to see when their last IWDS login is. So this 1/1/1900 means they've never logged in since the user ID was created. But this could say, for example, 7/1/2021. And if you've got a particular employee that you're wondering whether or not they're actually logging in and doing their job, you can go in and take a look here and see when their last login was. To disable the IWDS user ID when they've left the OEF, you just change enabled from yes to no, and you change the disabled reason to the reason of no longer employed by partner. There are multiple options for the choices in the disabled reason. Just choose the one that's most appropriate. 99% of the time, it's going to be no longer employed. IWDS is a reporting legacy system that stores user data in relation to the client data. So you could have somebody who worked for your OEA 5 years ago with clients. We don't want to delete that user because they're attached to those client records. And we've actually had several situations where people come back. You know, they might move from place to place if they're working for subcontractors, especially up in the Chicago region. You could have somebody who left the agency and, you know, came back because they decided they liked their old job better. You can always go back in and re-enable the old ID if it's somebody who hasn't been gone very long. But if it's someone who's been gone, I'd even say over a year, I would create a new user ID just to try to make sure that we're tracking the related client data correctly. User access requests. Local system administrators are the only people at the LWEA with the authorization to make user access requests or removal requests to the Office of Employment and Training for IBIS, IES, or IWDS systems. Emails have to be sent with the necessary forms to the appropriate Office of Employment and Training staff for all LWEA users. So, your employee can't contact me directly to ask for an IBIS reset or to ask me to re-enable their LWEA ID. And the reason behind this is that we're not in your LWEAs. We're not out there statewide looking to see who's been hired, fired, suspended, under observation. You know, we don't know. We rely on the local system administrators as our front line of defense to keep people out of the system that don't belong in it. IWDS LWIA 90, which is the statewide grants, that access is requested through the IWDS system administrators, which would be Jim Potts or me. Requests should be submitted by the Office of Employment and Training Grant Manager, which would be, for example, some of you have worked with Lorraine Wareham or Tammy Stone or Tamika. Those are the ones who would be, you would have them submit the request for an LWIA 90 ID based on what grant number they'll be working with. And you have or it could be that the local system administrator submits with the grant manager CC'd on the email, because like I said, Jim Potts and I are going to need to know what grant they're working with, and that way there we kind of have an idea of what the dates are and when they should be having access to LWIA 90. All LWIA 90 users have to have a current IDES data sharing agreement acknowledgement form on file with OET before we can grant access to LWIA 90. And the local system administrator should contact the IWDS system administrators at OET for IWDS LWIA 90 user passwords, resets, or if the person has left employment at the LWIA, so we can disable the LWIA 90 user access. Any corrections to an LWIA 90 client application information will need to be submitted to the IWDS system administrators at Office of Employment and Training. Any assistance with exits or performance on an LWIA 90 client need to be submitted to the LWIA performance measures staff, which is Mark Burgess and Paula Berry at OET, with a CC to the IWDS system administrators, because that way there Jim and I know what's going on, because there could be related issues or problems, and we need to just be aware of what's happening with these LWIA 90 clients. When an LWIA 90 user is no longer employed by the LWIA or no longer needs the LWIA 90 access, email the IWDS system administrators and the SDA liaison. So you would email Chris Tylen, Jim Potts, and Janet Davis to inform us of the change so that we can disable the LWIA 90 ID. IBIS, Illinois Benefit Information System. This program is owned by the Illinois Department of Employment Security, and it contains unemployment benefit information. To access the IBIS system, you're going to need to have a PKI digital ID issued by the Department of Information Technology, and you're also going to have the RAC-F ID. So it's a two-part system. Be thankful. Years ago, it was a three-part system with Citrix digital ID and RAC-F. The request to add, remove, or to reset passwords for the IBIS users has to be submitted by a local system administrator. That goes back to the we don't know who's active in your LWIA. So IBIS access is requested by submitting a Bureau of Agency Services ITM External User ID request form. The user has to have an IDS data sharing agreement acknowledgement form on file. So if they've already filed one for being in IWDS, we'll just double check with Janet and make sure it's current, it's active, and we're good to go. These forms can be submitted at the same time. So like if you have a brand new IWDS user and you haven't given them their IWDS ID yet, but you also want to make sure that they have access to look up IBIS, you can turn in the data sharing agreement and the IBIS form at the same time and just send them to me and Janet. Any changes to a user information, such as if there is a legal name change, a work address, a work email, a work phone, will be submitted to me via email, and I'll share it with the SDA liaison because she has to update her information as well. and I will submit a form to have the RACF ID user information updated. If that changes on the IWDS level, you're responsible to go in as the local system administrator and change it on their IWDS record. Office of Employment Training is only authorized to process IBIS access for LWEA employees that are using the system for WIOA activities. Like I said, trade falls under that, so Daniela just assumed that anytime I'm referring to WIOA activities, that I do mean WIOA and TAA. But if somebody in your office who's not on your WIOA team is wanting access to IBIS for some other reason, we can't grant it. That's not something that we're allowed to do. We're very limited in our scope where we have access to these IDs, and I'm very careful about making sure that we follow the rules. So all the highlighted fields on this form need to be filled out for a brand new RACF ID to be created. So we'll mark new ID. You'll fill in the client name, their work phone number, work address, city, state, zip, what LWEA number they're at, their work email. This section here where you're requesting access to IMS, TSO host, system application, you'll mark this over here where you're doing inquiry status only. And then this digital certificate ID refers to the PKI digital ID, which we'll discuss here shortly. And then the actual applicant themselves, not the local system administrator, the applicant signs and dates it, and then you make a PDF of it and send it to me. Creating a PKI digital ID is actually very simple, but a lot of people don't. I send out a PDF that has these instructions, and I can't tell you how many times people skip it and they put their IWDS ID on there. They have to do an actual PKI digital ID at the Department of Innovation and Technology. So this is the link. It's also on the PDF that I send out. And it says right here on the page that if you have problems, don't contact Office of Employment Training. You have to call the help desk at one of these two numbers, and then you follow the options that are listed, because I can't help you with the digital ID creation. If you have somebody who has an out-of-state driver's license, they're going to have to call the number. If you have a person who recently changed their driver's license and they went from having a last name that begins with a B and now their last name begins with D, well, they may have to call in and have their driver's license and name updated. Because this system uses your state ID or state driver's license in order to grant your access. Getting a password reset. If the IBIS user is locked out with either being suspended or revoked, make a note here, that's a new update. They recently added some new terminology. Instead of using the word revoked, they like to use the word suspended now as the reason why you can't get in. But so if the IBIS user goes to log in and it comes up and says that their access is revoked or suspended, then that means they need to email in. They email you, you email me to get a password reset. Now, if it comes up and says it's expired, that just means they need to go reset their password. Completely different thing. They don't need a reset. They don't need to be re-enabled. They just need to go reset their password, and that's going to be a monthly duty. Now, I am only authorized to process RACF resets for people that are requesting it for IBIS. I know that this particular RACF ID can also be used to get into GRS or SNAP or several other state of Illinois programs. Your request when you email it to me has to say on it, it's a request for a RACF reset with no other details, or it has to say it's for IBIS. If the request is coming in and it's because you're trying to access GRS, I have to refuse it and tell you to contact the GRS coordinator. I can only reset them if it's for IBIS requests. When we do the password reset and it comes back from the CEO RACF group, I don't do it myself. I send it off. It comes back. The temporary password is only good for 48 business hours. So if it comes back on Friday afternoon, that password has to be used before Tuesday afternoon or it's going to expire. Currently, our RACF coordinator, the security RACF coordinator, works a 4-day work week of Tuesday through Friday. So any requests that come in on Monday aren't likely to be resolved until Tuesday unless the backup coordinators are caught up on their work and look to see if there's any requests pending. And I'll be honest with you, that doesn't happen every week. That is rare, to be honest. So when the RACF password comes back with a reset, you'll click this link, which is the newest way they want you to do it. There are probably 4 or 5 different things out there where you used to go into the old mainframe system to do resets. You had you could do a reset somewhere else. You cannot do the reset on the IBIS page itself. You have to go in to this link. And what's going to happen is you're going to get this message, which I've created to try to help the users. It comes back and it says that your new password has to meet the following requirements. The password has to be exactly 8 characters. The password has to have at least 1 letter and 1 number. And it has to have one of the following special characters. And this is the one that usually trips people up. If they're trying to create a new password and they're having problems, usually this is the first thing that trips them up. It has to have either a #, hashtag, $, or an @ sign. It will not accept a question mark. It won't accept an underscore. It won't accept an exclamation point. It has to have one of these 3. Note, and this is something we found out along the way, the password cannot begin with that special character. It has to be something that's either in the 2nd through the 8th position. The password cannot be your first or last name. The password cannot be abbreviations or names of months, and it must be a password that you have not used in the IBIS system for the previous 12 months. I recommend to use a password you can increment, like flower #1, coffee $1, or plant @01. Personally, the one I use is a 2-digit. That way there, as I keep incrementing, I can go all the way up to 99 before I have to flip back to 00. When you click this link, this is what comes up right here, the change MVS password. They need to enter their RACF ID, the old password, which if they just had a password reset, it's going to be your temporary password. Then they type their new password twice and click the button, and that's it. The thing that usually trips people up here, if you have a user that's not very experienced, they may put the wrong ID in here. They might put their digital ID. They might put their IWDS ID. They might put your local ID. This first spot, MVS ID, is expecting you to put your MHD number. Your old password, which I've asked them to put temporary in parentheses here, but that's falling on deaf ears. It's not your password. If you had a password reset, it's not going to be the password you used to have. It's going to be the new reset password, which the way that the security generates it, they do a 3-letter season, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, and then they do an @ sign, and then they do a 2-digit month and a 2-digit year. Now, if you're doing this on your own because it came up and said you were expired, it will be the password that you were using before. So if you are flower #4, you'll put your old password of flower #4, your new password of flower #5, retype flower #5, and click change password. To deactivate an IBIS user, you just need to send an email to the IBIS coordinator, which is me. I will generate the deactivate request form, and I'll submit it I submit those to the RACF security group once per week. I also submit the user request access forms once per week. So I'll do all of those on Friday afternoon. So as long as you've got something into me by noon on Friday, it will get processed that afternoon. If the OEA employee leaves your employment, you have to notify me and the SDA liaison, Janet Davis, as soon as possible. We need to remove their access because it could be a violation of the data sharing agreement if a user accessed Ibiz who is no longer employed by your OEA. It would be really bad. In my 11 years now with DCEO, I've had one incident where there was a person who was accessing Ibiz for reasons that they shouldn't. And this is another thing you have to monitor as a local system administrator. We had someone who was an OEA employee, and they took it upon themselves to look up their coworkers and their spouses because Ibiz apparently has wage data in it. So it basically let this person find out how much each person in her office was making per year, as well as how much money their spouses were making. And she was telling people. So someone submitted to me that they thought she was using the system for personal reasons and not work related. And we did a investigation into it, and that person was removed from IBIS access. And there's a note out there even still now, 7 years later, that says that this person is to never have access to this system ever again. They continued to be employed by the OEA for 2 more years. That was the OEA's call, not mine. But that person was no longer allowed to access this data, and they tried a couple of times to see if they could get her access again, and it was denied. So if something like this happens in your OEA, where you have somebody who's using any of the state systems to look up, personal information of people that are not client related, it's your responsibility to step in and stop it. And in some cases, it could lead to you needing to discharge the employee. IES is the Integrated Eligibility System. It's a computer-based public benefits application and management system. It's ran by HFS, Department of Healthcare and Family Services, and DHS, Department of Human Services. It combines the information where people can see all the benefits, medical, SNAP, TANF, for at least the last 12 months, earned and unearned income used to determine the benefit eligibility, client notices. I'm not sure what REDE dates are because I don't use the system. I don't have a reason to be in there because I'm not a case manager. And family members that are also included in the case. So for example, if you have a youth client and the mother is in SNAP, you may be able to verify that through IES and then see that the youth is listed in the case. IES access is granted to the OEAs as a subcontractor through Office of Employment Training through yet another shared data agreement between DCEO and DHS. If you have any questions regarding whether your agency has access to the IES system, you need to contact the SDA liaison, which is Janet Davis. I think all OEAs have access now. At one point in time, it was slowly rolling out, but I think everybody's in there now. But if you aren't sure, email Janet and make sure that you guys are able to do this. To gain access, the local system administrator is going to submit to the Office of Employment Training Shared Data Agreement Liaison. For each staff person from your agency requesting access to IES, you're going to need to complete the Systems Access Request IL 444-2022 form. You have to review the HIPAA and privacy policy training for externals and the external security awareness training. You'll have to complete and sign the IES HIPAA privacy policy training attestation and the IES certificate of understanding. Both forms will then also be signed by the user's supervisor. You need to obtain an external ID, username and password, and then at that point you submit all the forms to the SDA liaison. IES is not something that Jim Potts or I or Paula Berry or Mark Burgess have anything to do with. everything is organized and localized through the SDA liaison, who is Janet Davis right now. Here's a copy of what the form looks like. The highlighted fields are the ones you're going to need to fill in. And then you send this request form along with the IES HIPAA Privacy Policy Training Attestation and the IES Certificate of Understanding to the SDA liaison. The external ID, each staff person who requires access will have to obtain an external ID at the Do-It Identity Management website. The link is provided here. If you hover over it on the PowerPoint, it shows the web address if you need to enter it manually. It's a self-service account management system that allows users to create an Illinois.gov ID and/or reset their account password. The user will use this external user ID and password to log into IES. It's very similar to what we had to do with the PKI digital ID for RACF access. You click the link, it takes you to a Do-It Identity Management page. You're going to click Create Illinois.gov account. And if your information is not entered exactly as it appears on your driver's license, it could cause your registration to fail. Employees that do not have an Illinois driver's license are not eligible to register through the automated system. You'll have to call the help desk. A state of Illinois ID cannot be used instead of a driver's license. You'll have to notify your agency lead, who will then in turn notify their HFS or DHS liaison. So if you do not have an Illinois driver's license, you're going to have to go through a few additional hoops to get your access. Do-It requires an email address verification. We'll send a confirmation email when completed. Tell your people to use their work email. We have some people who have put their personal emails in there. It's best if they use work emails for work-related information. The user will click on the link in the email they receive, and they will be returned to the Do-It website to complete the self-registration form. If you need to update your user information for IES, you will submit a brand new completed access request form. So if somebody gets married, divorced, they move work locations, they move from this building to that building, their work email changes, their work phone number changes, it's a whole new form. It's not, I'll admit, it's not convenient, but it's the way we have to do it. It's not our system, we just follow the rules. If the user email changes, you're going to have to create a new external ID all over again and submit the form to become access with your new work email. Because it's multi-factor authentication, it's going to be very important that your IES account is an accurate work email. So especially when you're dealing with somebody with a legal name change, marriage, divorce, legal name change for personal reasons, that's going to change your state of Illinois driver's license, because each of those numbers correlates to different, I think the first 5 letters of your last name are somewhere in your driver's license. So what will happen is you're gonna, if your driver's license changes, you're gonna have to get a new ID. It's just the way it is. They're gonna have to come in, get a new external ID, fill out a new form, and get a new access. If the person needs a password or a user reset, the users are required to change their password every 60 days. If they fail to change it, they're going to get locked out. Additionally, any users that are inactive and don't log in at all for 60 days, they're going to have their status changed to inactive, and it basically disables the account. If the user ID becomes inactive, you're going to need to resubmit a new access request form for the SDA liaison to reactivate the account. Gaining access. To sign in, you'll use the username, including the domain that the user was given when the user obtained their external ID through Do-It. For example, mary.smith@external.illinois.gov. The user will also have received a system-generated notification of when the user's name was added to IES. So the username from Do-It should match the user ID in the notification. If those IDs names do not match, this is going to cause an error, and it could prevent you from logging in. If you have this error happening, you just need to contact the SDA liaison, which is Janet Davis, to correct this problem. To deactivate an IES user, you're going to submit an access request form to delete the access to the SDA liaison in order to stay compliant with our DCEO DHS shared data agreement. And as I kind of alluded to earlier with the IBIS stuff, if there's any possible system misuse, if you suspect that an LWS employee or a subcontractor is misusing their access to any of the state systems, IWDS, LWN 90, IWDS, IBIS, IES, you need to contact the IWDS system administrators at DCO immediately, which would be Jim Potts or me, Chris Tylen. Misuse includes accessing the systems for outside employment for a different job or non-LWO or WEO related, or using the systems to look up family members, coworkers, or celebrities. Yes, the most common celebrity that people misuse the state systems to look up is Oprah Winfrey. Second most common is Michael Jordan. Here's your contacts. As of today, the IWDS system administrators are Jim Potts and Chris Tylen. The IBIS coordinator is Chris Tylen. The WEO performance measure staff is Mark Burgess and Paula Berry. And the SDA liaison is Janet Davis. And now, are there any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing the chat at the moment. I'm going to pull it up here. And we're going to take a quick look at this. All right. I'm going to drop up to the top and I'm going to run through this real quick. All right. What combination of roles should we give staff members for whom we only want to give the ability to read and create case notes? I believe that the roles that would do something along those lines. Now we have a document that should be available, which kind of lists out what the different roles can be. But if you're just wanting them to do case notes, unfortunately, I think you're still going to have to give them the case management view only, LWS staff, but then you don't give them any of the career planner roles. I think if you give them LWS staff and case management view only, I think they're going to have the ability to enter notes. If not, they may end up having to have the career planner. And if that's the case, let me know, because that's one of the things that we have noted. We're looking toward the future as to what will be the next system to replace IWDS. And we know that having somebody who has just a case notes role is something that a lot of the LWIAs want. So it's something that we are definitely looking at doing. And it may be something that we might want to turn around and include in the next system. We may want to try to do it in this system if it's going to be a while before we see the new one. And let me go back in the chat. And yeah, right here in the chat itself, Kirsten put in the local system administrator document that I was referring to. So you just need to download it from the top of the chat. And if you need a copy of it, you can always email me and I'll just send it to you along with copies of these PowerPoints if you're having problems downloading them. We're going to put the PDF in WorkNet along with the copies of the PowerPoints and this recording. So all that should be available. I don't know what that link will be. It's something that once we have verification from WorkNet when it's been posted, that we can send out to everyone who is on the training today. To obtain the IL 444-2022 form, you contact the SDA liaison, which is Janet Davis. Her email address was right here. And then what browsers to use as IWDS? IWDS was designed mainly because the state has a contract with Microsoft for use with Internet Explorer. obviously Internet Explorer is going away, so they increased it to where we've got Internet Explorer and Edge. And then I argued that we were having a number of people who were using Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox, as well as having people who have Apple computers and are using Safari. Several years ago, I want to say 4 maybe, we updated IWDS to acknowledge all of those different browsers. I'm going to tell you right now, we know that there are hiccups that happen with each one of the browsers that are not Microsoft. For example, Google, if you click the enter button on your keyboard when entering case notes instead of clicking next with your mouse, it will cause an error. That's a known error that we cannot fix. I know that Mozilla has another hiccup in it where if you're attempting to use multiple tabs, it really messes up the client record. And that's just in general. IWDS is designed as a one screen, one system. So your one login is logged into one screen on one tab. Opening another tab is just going to confuse the system and cause cross-contamination, especially if you're using looking up two different clients on the different tabs. We've had situations where the case notes for one client got saved on the other one. Also, if you try to outsmart the system and be signed in with Edge and be signed in with Mozilla or Chrome and have 2 windows open with 2 separate browsers, that'll cause some errors too. IWDS is designed for one screen at a time. That's something that, it would be nice in the next system if we have a little more flexibility to where multiple tabs is something that we can handle, where you can be doing more than one thing at a time. But honestly, with the security constraints and the other things that we have for, sharing the data back and forth through the system, I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think we're always going to be looking at just one screen per client per session. Now, if you have multiple IDs, and let's say you have an IWDS LWIA 90 ID and a regular LWIA ID, and you want to be logged into your LWIA 90 ID in Chrome and be logged into your regular ID in Edge, that's not going to cause a problem because you have 2 separate connections with 2 IDs. So you can do something like that if you're multitasking. I don't recommend it because you can get confused as to what person you're in, but you do you. As for IBIS, yes, IBIS has to have, they have told me, I've asked, they are Microsoft completely still. Matter of fact, their system still prefers Internet Explorer over Edge. Edge, they're going to have to accept Edge because of everything that's going on with Internet Explorer being retired, but their system is specifically designed for use with Internet Explorer, and you have to make sure that the compatibility view settings are set in order for Internet Explorer to work properly. They're going to have to come into the next century here and get into Edge real soon, because I know that Internet Explorer is being retired. But at this point right now, the IBIS people are still telling me every time I ask, it's still Internet Explorer only. Yep, and like Rory just said, multiple tabs is it's bad. The errors it can cause on a record are just incredible that you would just not expect it. All right, guys, we are going to take a quick 5-minute break, 6-minute break. We're going to pick right back up at 10:15, and we're going to get into the editing IWDS screens. All right, thanks. I'm going to hit mute, and you guys have a 5-minute break.